As the cannons of World War II roared and the world descended into chaos, one man became a beacon of light and hope for millions. His name was Glenn Miller, a musician, conductor, and creator of enchanting melodies. He seemed to embody harmony itself amid the madness of war. His mysterious disappearance would go on to become one of the most heartbreaking and baffling mysteries of that era. For decades, people searched for the truth, and only in 2014 did newly discovered documents lift the veil, revealing shocking details of the tragedy. If the big band era had its own rock stars, Glenn Miller would have been its brightest icon. Though his tuxedos and glasses made him look more like a modest professor, his legions of fans adored him with the same passion that future generations would show for rock idols. His rise to fame was meteoric, but his life was cut tragically short, leaving behind an ache of loss and unanswered questions. His body was never recovered. His story began in distant Iowa on March 1, 1904. His full name was Alton Glenn Miller, though like many in his family, he preferred to go by his middle name, Glenn. His childhood was marked by simplicity and hard work. In 1915, the family moved to Nebraska, and young Glenn began taking small jobs, milking cows and saving every coin to one day pursue his dream. With his savings, he bought his first trombone, the instrument that would change the course of his life. With that trombone, he joined his town's orchestra for the first time. Soon after, he also mastered the mandolin and cornet, immersing himself completely in music. He sacrificed everything for this passion, even his education. While his classmates celebrated their graduation, Glenn was already performing on stage. His obsession with music only deepened. When he enrolled in college, he quickly realized that dull lectures could not satisfy the hunger in his soul. Before long, he dropped out entirely, betting everything on his music. Leaving campus behind, Miller moved to New York City, the place where dreams are either fulfilled or crushed. Here, he plunged into a world overflowing with musicians, where competition was merciless. He studied the unique Schillinger system, a method where science and art merged into precise formulas for creating melodies. It was during this period that he composed his first piece, modestly titled Miller's Tune. This tune would later evolve into Moonlight Serenade, his legendary musical signature that would be remembered for generations. But before that transformation, he had to face harsh realities. New York was brimming with talent. While playing in Ben Pollock's orchestra, Miller witnessed a new star rise, a young, bold trombonist named Jack Teagarden. His flawless technique and irresistible charisma quickly made him the center of attention. The parts once played by Miller were now handed over to Teagarden. For Glenn, this was a painful blow. He was not one to settle for second place. At that moment, he made a pivotal decision. If he could not be the greatest soloist, he would become the one who creates the music. He embarked on a quest to find his own unique sound, one that would one day make his name immortal. Music was always more than just notes on a page for him. It was breath, a dream, the very essence of his soul. His name was Glenn Miller. He wasn't content with simply playing the trombone. He composed, arranged, and created something uniquely his own, constantly reaching for heights that existed only in his imagination. And just as his career finally began to gather momentum, he knew it was time to start a family. There had long been one woman in his heart, Helen Berger, the girl he had dated back in college. Helen had waited patiently, ready to follow him wherever his journey might lead. But not everyone shared her conviction. Her parents viewed the ambitious musician with concern. How would he provide for their daughter? What kind of future awaited a family led by a man of the stage rather than a man with a stable profession? But Helen didn't need her parents' approval. She made her choice. Leaving her childhood home behind, she traveled to New York to become his wife, defying doubt and fear alike. Now, Glenn faced a new challenge: to prove to Helen's parents that they had been wrong. Soon, fortune smiled upon him. With financial backing from his friend Simon Schrimm, Miller assembled his orchestra, and in the spring of 1938, the first clear notes of success finally rang out in his life. His reputation grew day by day. New York was beginning to talk about him. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Glen Island Casino, a launching pad for many stars. Now it was his turn. When Miller's orchestra arrived, the musicians couldn't believe their eyes. 1,800 people had come to see them perform. It was nothing short of a triumph. By the following year, Time magazine reported that out of 10 songs spinning in American jukeboxes, anywhere from 2 to 6 belonged to Miller. His music had captured the nation. Then came Tuxedo Junction, a tune that, in its first week, sold 115,000 copies. This was the moment when his career skyrocketed into the stratosphere. On October 6, 1939, he achieved every musician's dream, performing at Carnegie Hall. But the story didn't end there. Hollywood had taken notice. 20th Century Fox invited Miller to appear in the musical comedy Sun Valley Serenade. Not only did he compose the music, but he also appeared on screen, delivering a performance that would become legendary. Although the film was set at a ski resort in Idaho, the director insisted on featuring a melody that would showcase Miller's full talent. And so Chattanooga Choo Choo was born. A song unrelated to snow-covered slopes, but one that instantly captured the hearts of audiences. 8 minutes of cinematic magic, dazzling choreography. The public was enthralled. The single became the first ever to receive a gold record, selling over 1,200,000 copies. But Glenn Miller was more than a musician, he was a patriot. When World War II broke out, he was ready to serve his country. Yet fate tested him once again. At the time, married men were not being drafted, and his glasses further complicated matters, making his enlistment unlikely. But Miller was not one to give up. Instead, he found another way. He believed his music could serve his country as powerfully as any weapon. He wrote a long letter to the Army general, offering his experience to help boost the morale of American soldiers. He had a bold, almost reckless idea to bring jazz into military music. In the rigid world of the armed forces, it bordered on sacrilege. But he believed that pulsing rhythms, the freedom of improvisation, and the warmth of saxophones could lift the spirits of soldiers and offer them a small piece of home amid the foreign lands of war. The idea was approved. He was given 1 month, time to wrap up unfinished business and say goodbye to his former life. On September 24, 1942, Glenn Miller took to the airwaves for the final time on his regular radio program. His listeners hung onto every note, sensing that the farewell was near. A few days later, he and his orchestra performed their last live concert at the Central Theater in New Jersey. The music fell silent. Miller closed the chapter of his life that had made him a legend. But the Army did not offer him a break from the hectic pace he had known. Quite the opposite. His military service consumed him with the same intensity as his music once had. He auditioned musicians for Army bands, directed radio productions in New York, and recruited and trained new personnel. In him, the Army gained not just an officer, but a passionate innovator. Accustomed to doing things his own way, Miller faced resistance from the start. He dared to weave blues tones, light jazz inflections, and fresh arrangements into rigid marching tunes. Traditionalists were outraged, believing that Army music should never sound so free. A battle of opinions erupted, and he argued his case with the same determination that had once fueled his rise to stardom. In the end, he prevailed. Miller forever transformed military music, making it vibrant, human, and deeply personal to every soldier. In the spring of 1944, a telegram arrived, a personal order from General Dwight Eisenhower. The general was convinced that Miller's music could sustain the morale of troops on the European front. Miller was summoned to the very heart of the war. On June 19th, he arrived in London. His orchestra set up in a BBC office, right in the center of the city, as air raid sirens wailed and German bombs thundered overhead. Glenn could not allow his musicians to work under constant threat. He found a safer location and moved his band. His decision proved life-saving. The very next day, the BBC office was destroyed in a bombing raid, and 150 people perished in the rubble. Even in Britain, surrounded by the searing heat of war, Glenn continued to create. He formed a close friendship and partnership with David Niven, the actor who would one day win Hollywood's highest honors and an Oscar. Together, they produced programs that carried hope, warmth, and strength across the airwaves to thousands of soldiers fighting far from home. The autumn of 1944 carried more than just the chill of approaching winter. It was filled with anxious anticipation. Europe was ablaze with war, but even amid the chaos, music continued to play. It offered comfort, a distant whisper that somewhere beyond the horizon, peace still existed. Among those who carried this fragile hope to the people was the legendary conductor and bandleader Glenn Miller. Miller did not simply perform music. He healed wounded souls with it. His dream was to bring his orchestra to France, performing for soldiers in hospitals and entertaining weary troops snatching brief moments of rest from the front lines. But war cares little for precise plans. The relocation was delayed. That is when his devoted assistant, Nan, made a decisive move. She arranged for Miller to fly ahead and prepare everything for the orchestra's arrival. His departure was scheduled for December 14th, but the skies were not kind that day. The weather deteriorated rapidly, and the flight was canceled. This seemingly minor twist of fate set off a tragic chain of events. The next day, Miller's acquaintance, Lieutenant Colonel Norman Bessel, offered him a seat on a small single-engine Norseman plane bound for Paris. Technically, Miller was not authorized to board this flight. His name was not on the official orders, but he chose to go. Paris was waiting for his music. On December 15th, just before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the tiny plane lifted off into the heavy gray sky from Twinwood Farm Airfield. It was never seen again. Miller, Bessel, and the pilot vanished into the cold winter mist. That same morning, as clouds gathered in the skies, a storm of war was also building on the ground. German forces launched a surprise offensive that would later be known as the Ardennes counteroffensive, or the Battle of the Bulge. The stunned Allied forces were locked in fierce combat and hardly noticed the disappearance of a single small aircraft. It was not until 9 long days later that anyone fully grasped what had happened. Glenn Miller was missing. 2 senior officers personally visited Helen Miller's home to deliver the devastating news. The words caught in her throat. She and Glenn had recently adopted a young boy named Stephen. Even more heartbreakingly, just weeks earlier, they had welcomed another child into their family, a baby girl named Johnny. Miller never had the chance to meet his daughter. He had written about her, dreamed of the moment, made plans, but the war stole it all away. On Christmas of 1944, the world learned of the tragedy. Radio stations broadcast the grim message: Glenn Miller is missing. His whereabouts are unknown. Despite the sorrow, the scheduled holiday concert still went on. Stepping up to the conductor's stand was Jerry Gray, a fellow musician who carried on his friend's legacy. Naturally, the public sought answers. Thick fog had blanketed the skies that day. The plane's wings may have iced over. All signs pointed to a tragic accident. But stories like this rarely rest quietly. Whispers began circulating, claims of German gunfire, rumors of secret missions involving Miller, even tales of his possible capture. Yet, a new theory emerged many years later, nearly half a century after his disappearance. In the year 2000, a World War II flight log appeared at an auction. Its author, Derek Thurman, claimed he had participated in a bombing raid over Germany on that fateful night. Perhaps their flight paths had crossed high above the war-torn continent. And perhaps the truth of what happened to Glenn Miller will forever remain hidden among the dense December clouds. Thus ended the earthly journey of a man whose music brought warmth during the coldest of times. Yet the melodies of Glenn Miller still echo today, a quiet reminder that even amidst the horrors of war, there is always space for beauty, love, and dreams. In that December winter of 1944, a dense fog hovered over the English Channel, and the air was heavy with anxiety. The world was caught in the whirlwind of war, yet the music of the great Glenn Miller continued to warm hearts. His orchestra gave soldiers and their families a reason to hope. But one day, as his plane took off to cross the Channel, it vanished, dissolving into the gray mist as if swallowed by the sky itself. For many years, Glenn Miller's fate remained an unsolved mystery, fueling countless theories and speculations. One of the most chilling came from a British pilot. According to his account, their crew was returning from a mission that day. Before landing, they had to dispose of unused bombs which were typically dropped into the sea. At the moment the deadly cargo was released, the crew spotted a small aircraft flying in the opposite direction. Astonishingly, it may well have been Glenn Miller's plane. The tail gunner even claimed to have seen the aircraft flip and plunge into the icy waters below. That day, according to military records, no other planes were supposed to be in that sector. And the central question lingered: why was Miller's aircraft there? The answer would only come many years later, and from an unexpected source. In 2012, a man named Sam Anderton appeared on the television program Antiques Roadshow, carrying old notebooks that had belonged to his late brother. As a young man, his brother had been a devoted plane spotter, meticulously recording every aircraft he saw in the sky. These yellowed pages suddenly became priceless. They might hold the key to the mystery. It turned out that Miller's plane had been following its assigned route precisely and was on schedule. The theory that British pilots had accidentally shot him down now seemed as fragile as a house of cards. Then, as if fate itself offered another clue, a new revelation emerged. In 1987, a fisherman off the coast of Dorset hauled pieces of aircraft wreckage into his nets. Not realizing their significance, he returned them to the sea. Only years later, after seeing a photograph of Miller's plane, did he suspect that he might have once held its remains in his hands. His account helped researchers identify a possible location for the wreckage. But so far, these leads remain just possibilities. No hard proof has ever been found. Meanwhile, Glenn Miller's son, Stephen Miller, spent years trying to untangle the web of rumors and conspiracy theories. Exhausted by endless speculation, he turned to Dennis Sprague, a leading expert on his father's life. Digging deep into military archives, Sprague uncovered forgotten documents. His investigation led to a new theory. During that fateful winter over the Channel, the temperatures had dropped so low that the fuel intake valves in the aircraft's engines froze. The plane lost power and fatally descended into the freezing waters below. Yet Stephen never lived to see a definitive answer. He passed away in 2012. The mystery of the great bandleader's death, whose music once carried hope through the darkest days of war, still hides its final, somber truth beneath the waves.